Welcome back, everyone. You may have heard there's some stuff about Greenland in the news. And as promised, I'm taking maybe once every week or every other week some time just to take a look at what's going on in the world and how it relates to history and what we can learn from history that applies to the present historical events that are unfolding that will become a part of our history that we look back and our kids and grandkids and great-grandkids talk about later on. So today we're going to talk a little bit about what's going on with Greenland, and I think Warfronts is a channel that does a good job with staying on top of events as they're unfolding. So we're going to take a look at this one. The title of it is Will Trump Attack Greenland? So let's dive into this one, talk about what's going on, talk about everything it relates to.
Just a few short years ago, it would have seemed like a fantasy, the idea that the US military might invade, occupy, and annex the island of Greenland, a sparsely populated, semi-autonomous territory within the kingdom of longtime US ally Denmark. But today, in the aftermath of American operations in Venezuela to capture Nicolas Maduro, it no longer seems so unlikely, does it? Washington is flexing its muscles in the Western Hemisphere. The new Don Roe Doctrine calls...
Yeah, and he actually did use that term himself, Donald Trump, calling it the Don Roe Doctrine. So we've talked a little bit about the Monroe Doctrine in the past. We talked about it in the video about Venezuela. Just some background here, of course. Denmark does own Greenland. Greenland is sparsely populated. We're talking about a little over 50,000 people, most of them on the coast. I think almost all of them on the coast. Understand, too, that when you look at most maps of Greenland, it looks huge. That's the Mercator projection. The way that maps look makes it look way bigger than it really is. If you see it actually overlaid on a map of the United States or Europe or Africa, you see it's actually much smaller than it looks on the map. And most of that population's just like in little strips along the coast. Most of the inland parts, all ice and snow, and just not a lot there. We are part of NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which was formed in the aftermath of World War II, which is a alliance that, among other things, has what's called Article 5, which is something that can be invoked in case that one of the member nations is attacked. And I think it's a pretty hazy area what happens when one of those member nations is attacked by another one of the member nations, but that's possibly what we're looking at here.
For US dominance over all the Americas, and officials in the Trump administration are openly discussing taking Greenland by force. While Secretary of State Marco Rubio has sought to downplay these threats, saying the US is instead focused on buying the island, the fact that Copenhagen and Nuuk both say it's not for sale is stirring worries about what happens next.
And that's the real question here, right? And I have a lot of people who have argued to me this is The Art of the Deal, which was Trump's book that he wrote, which is him basically taking a very hardline stance to force them to negotiate a sale of it. But the other side of that, and the side that I tend to lean toward, is that this is just bullying an ally. If they have said clearly it's not for sale, if the people in Greenland say we don't want to be part of the United States, the people in Denmark have said we're not selling it to the United States, and the United States president is saying we will have it one way or another, the inference from that is that if you won't sell it to us, we will take it.
So now seems as good a time as any for us to dive into these threats and try and figure out what they really do mean.
Yeah.
Are they credible? Are they just pressure tactics? Or are they the prelude to another sharp demonstration of America's military prowess, only this time turned against a treaty ally?
Right.
All that is gold. Read some of the reporting on Greenland, and it can feel like you've slipped into a parallel universe, one in which the United States is less a superpower and more a super predator. Just listen to this from the Wall Street Journal, quote, Trump and his team have declined to rule out using force to take over Greenland. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said Tuesday about the issue that, of course, utilizing the US military is always an option at the commander-in-chief's disposal.
Now, on one hand, you can look at that and say, well, that's just being prudent and leaving all your options on the table, which makes sense when you're talking about foreign policy. And in most cases, that would be true. In this case, though, if you look at that, then, you can't really, as the administration, say, well, no, we would never use force. And a lot of people who are defending this are saying, oh, well, they would never use force. But in order to get what you want, if you're trying to pressure them diplomatically into getting what you want, you have to leave force on the table as an option to, possibly get them to back down in all of this.
End quote. That is not a statement any reasonable person just a few years back would have ever expected to read. Nor would they have expected to hear that this threat of force was potentially being used to leverage Nuuk and Copenhagen into selling the territory to Washington. Especially after Greenland's democratically elected Prime Minister, Jens Friedrich Nielsen, recently declared that his nation of 57,000 people, quote, is not for sale.
And let's talk about something that has come up since this video was first released. It actually just came out this morning, and I want to pause and pull it up because I want to make sure I get it right. So this morning, this started to break in the news, and since then, we have found out that not only was this sent... so background, the Prime Minister of Norway reached out to the Trump administration and basically said, hey, let's de-escalate all of this. I'm proposing that we have a conversation later on today. And in response to that, this message was sent to the Prime Minister of Norway, and it has since then been forwarded to the embassies in Washington of the other European NATO members that are involved in all of this. And it says, Dear Jonas, meaning the Prime Minister of Norway, considering your country decided not to give me the Nobel Peace Prize for having stopped 8 wars plus, I no longer feel an obligation to think purely of peace, although it will always be predominant, but can now think about what is good and proper for the United States of America. Denmark cannot protect the land from Russia or China, and why do they have a right of ownership anyway? There are no written documents. It's only that a boat landed there hundreds of years ago, but we had boats landing there also. I have done more for NATO than any person since its founding, and now NATO should do something for the United States. The world is not secure unless we have complete and total control of Greenland. Thank you. A couple of things just to observe about this. Number one, if we are going to start talking about right of ownership based on who landed boats where, then France has rights to big swaths of the United States, so does Spain, so does the United Kingdom. There's no end to the way that can be interpreted in terms of right to ownership of places. Also, the whole point here is that NATO is meant for the fact that Denmark shouldn't have to be thought of as having to protect Greenland on its own. It's part of an alliance that is meant to mutually protect. And so we, as the United States, as part of NATO, have a treaty obligation to protect Greenland on behalf of Denmark. So does the United Kingdom, so does France, so does Italy, so does Germany, and all these other powers. Anyway, let's get back into this.
Hence the behind-the-scenes panic in European capitals. So weird and alarming is all this rhetoric, the logic goes, that it must be serious. Trump really must be considering annexing part of the Kingdom of Denmark, a long-standing ally. Now, given how 2026 has gone so far, it would be a foolish outlet that ruled out a military takeover. The capture of Maduro, if nothing else, has shown not only the full extent of US military power, but also the administration's willingness to use it. As key Trump advisor Stephen Miller recently told CNN in the context of a possible American attack on Greenland, we live in a world, in the real world, that is governed by strength, that is governed by force, that is governed by power. These are the iron laws of the world since the beginning of time.
Yeah, and that has been the case. And, it's that old adage, might makes right. If we have the strength to do it, then we can do what we want. Of course, the argument would be then from people like Russia and China, well, then you've set the precedent. We're going to do the same thing. I mean, Russia's already been doing the same thing with Ukraine. That's been their argument is, well, here are all of our justifications for why we believe that we are right to do this, and now we're going to use our military force to exercise our rights. So China could do the same with Taiwan. China could do the same with other nations in the region, Mongolia or someone else, because they want the resources. And the argument, of course, from the Trump administration is that that's exactly who they are countering with this, is that they are basically preemptively taking Greenland before China or Russia takes it.
End quote. Not something you particularly want to hear if you're a Danish soldier tasked with protecting the Greenlandic capital of Nuuk from a foreign takeover. Yet, for all the warning signs that something could be coming down the pipeline, we're going to cautiously venture what may be an unfashionable opinion. US forceful annexation of Greenland remains highly unlikely, not because Trump won't try to get it. All of his actions suggest Nuuk and Copenhagen will soon be at the epicenter of a pressure campaign and possible economic coercion, but because there are good reasons for assuming that military action just wouldn't be worth it. And yes, you can absolutely feel free to clip that and throw it back in my...
Yeah, in a rational world, I would agree with you, but I'm just not sure that I am at the place where I'm willing to believe that we would never do that. I feel like 99% of the time, the presidents we've had in history, you could say, well, yeah, it's bluster, it's hot air, it's just negotiating tactics to get what they want. They would never really follow through on the threat. I'm not sure I feel that way in this case. I feel like this is a president that is willing to make those kinds of decisions. And I don't know what would happen if we do go down that road.
My face if we wake up in a few weeks to find the Delta Force has captured the government of Greenland. We're analysts, we're not fortune tellers. All we can try and do is weigh up the information available to us and make what we hope are educated assessments. And our first and most obvious assessment is that it's not the threat of counterattacks that make military action unlikely. Were the US to go into Greenland heavy, the chances of Danish soldiers fighting them off are roughly equal to the chances of anything coming from Mars. At least 1 billion to 1.
Right.
With just 57,000 people calling Greenland home and most of them clustered in settlements on the southwest coast, US forces would have to secure only a handful of buildings to declare mission accomplished.
Right. That's not the issue, though, here. The issue is, how does NATO respond? What is the next step? I don't think there's any serious chance that it ends up in armed conflict between the United States and the Army of Greenland. But what happens when Germany, for example, says, all right, all the U.S. bases, they're gone. Get your troops out of here. We've got dozens of bases in Germany. What happens when Turkey says, okay, no more U.S. presidents or U.S. presence here in our country? And then the dominoes fall from there.
Politico half jokes that this would take them, quote, perhaps a half hour. But the reality wouldn't likely be much longer. While the entire operation to capture Maduro took less time than the extended edition of Return of the King, overthrowing the Greenlandic government and securing the island might be over and done in the time that it takes to watch 3 episodes of Warfronts, and not the long ones. But to focus purely on the military side of things is to forget that events don't happen in a vacuum, disconnected from the wider world. And it's here that we get our reasons for cautiously believing an invasion is unlikely to happen. The real-world conditions, they're just not in place. By the time Maduro was spirited away from Caracas by Delta Force, he was a widely despised autocrat who'd flagrantly stolen an election, overseen one of the worst economic collapses in modern history, and cultivated ties with both drug cartels and violent cross-border guerrilla groups like Colombia's ELN.
That's an excellent point here, is that while this was a very aggressive action by Trump in Venezuela, it's not one that there's been a ton of pushback against, at least not from our allies. You don't see France and the United Kingdom and others like putting economic sanctions on the United States because we went and grabbed Maduro. By and large, there's been whimpers from a few people and the usual suspects, but otherwise not a big deal. Greenland's a whole different story.
While the legality of snatching him from Venezuelan soil was dubious, there were very few in the US or abroad who were willing to shed tears over his toppling.
Absolutely.
Rightly or wrongly, that made the operation an easy sell to the public. At risk of stating the obvious here, none of this applies to Greenland. Prime Minister Nielsen won a free and fair democratic election just last year. There's no suggestion that his government is sending drugs to the United States, engaged in widespread illegality, or tacitly supporting a network of gangs that is spreading terror in American cities. It's Greenland. We mention this because it's exactly the sort of key consideration that nobody seems to be talking about. Never mind abroad. How do you sell to your own coalition the capture or killing of a young, democratically elected leader who has done no harm to your nation? Because that's what an operation to take Greenland by force would necessarily entail.
I hadn't really thought about that. It would require securing the government in some sort of way.
Arrest or liquidation of not just Nielsen, but other high-ranking Greenlanders who are firmly opposed to American annexation. One of the two MPs representing Greenland in the Danish parliament, Aya Chemnitz, has declared that, quote, "It's completely disrespectful from the US side to not rule out annexing our country." And polls show that the vast majority of the public are similarly opposed to joining the US.
Yep.
One from last year put the numbers at 85% against, with only 6% in favor.
And this is another one of those situations where the problem is that the very, very vocal minority makes it sound like there's more support than this than there is. And that's been true for a lot of things on both political sides over time. Is that there's a lot of people on social media who are speaking out in defense of these actions, and it makes it sound like there's this huge groundswell of support, and there really isn't.
You can't forcefully take over a population that's opposed to you without at least jailing or expelling the leadership from their homeland. And we want you to think seriously about this. Not in the abstract, I mean, hey, this is a fun thought experiment sense, but in the sense of how it would really honestly feel to watch US forces arresting or even killing Greenlandic officials whose only crime is to resist a violent takeover of their homeland.
And, of course, the argument for those in defense of this is that, well, we're never going to actually do that. And I've been having that conversation with people on social media today, where I expressed my extreme displeasure at Trump's letter today and things like that. And they're like, no, this is all negotiation. This is all hypothetical. He's never going to actually send troops and take Greenland by force. He just wants to buy it. But the fact is that if we do end up buying it, it'll only be because we threaten to take it by force. And we're doing this to a democratically elected government that is part of our alliance. Part of our alliance. This isn't some argument that there's weapons of mass destruction and a despotic regime that we need to overthrow for security in the Middle East. This is a part of NATO.
To try and imagine what would truly happen if Jens Fredrik Nielsen was dragged, Maduro-style, before a court in New York or just shot dead by US soldiers. That is the key difference between Greenland and recent US military actions in Venezuela against suspected drug boats in the Caribbean or in Iran. Venezuelan exiles in South Florida literally danced in the streets when Maduro was captured. It's hard to imagine anyone cheering as special forces stormed the parliament in Nuuk. Now, you could reasonably ask why this should matter. After all, the Trump administration bombed Iran over the objections of its own base and routinely does things like tearing down the east wing of the White House that polls badly with the public.
Yeah, and see, that kind of thing, well, I get it. I get the opposition to it. I think is more of a gray area where it's like, oh, you know what, you might not like it, but you're not going to like everything that any administration does, especially if you find yourself on the opposite side politically. But I feel like there's a huge difference between tearing down the East Wing and building a new construction project that people don't like and what we're talking about here in Greenland.
But something tells us that the invasion and annexation of a harmless democracy would be on a whole other level.
Right.
Visiting fellow of war studies at King's College London, Shashank Joshi, speculated on X that such an order could trigger a crisis within the US military. Quote, "One of the things that cuts against a US effort to seize Greenland by force is that I believe this is one of the few issues where you'll see serious high-level protest and resignations within the US armed forces."
I absolutely believe that's true. If we did, let's say next week, if the president ordered the US military to occupy Greenland over the objections of NATO members, over the objections of the Danish government, if we just sent troops in and took it anyway, I guarantee there would be mass resignations at the highest levels of the U.S. military. Guaranteed.
End quote. It's also one of the few issues that might trigger serious blowback from within Trump's own party. Already, at a time when annexation is only theoretical, 8 GOP senators have publicly come out against the president's threats, ranging from Lisa Murkowski of Alaska to Tom Tillis of North Carolina and Paul Rand of Kentucky. Were
Rand Paul, but yeah.
unilateral military action really undertaken, you would expect more to join them. Senator Paul recently told the Washington Post that, quote, he was unaware of a single Senate Republican who supports taking military action against the territory.
that's all fine and good, but what are you going to do about it? And some people are arguing at this point about the 25th Amendment, and for those who are unaware about how this works, the 25th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution has a provision in it in which the Vice President and a majority of the cabinet can sign a document that says that the President is unable to carry out his duties, he's incapacitated or in some way infirmed, and that would make the Vice President the acting President. Now, that sounds simple enough, but that comes to an end the moment the President then sends a message to the President pro tem of the Senate saying, I'm capable of doing my duties. So he would immediately send that message and saying, no, they're wrong. I'm fully able to handle the duties of presidency. And at that point, then, the Vice President and the majority of the cabinet would once again have to say, no, he's not. And now it goes to the Congress, and the House and the Senate would both have to vote with a 2/3 majority to side with the Vice President and the majority of the cabinet in order for that removal to become permanent. And at that point, it's actually easier for Congress to impeach him and then only get 2/3 in the Senate. You'd only need a majority in the House and 2/3 in the Senate to actually impeach and then remove from office. So it's actually easier to do that than it would be to do the 25th Amendment. I'm not suggesting any of that's going to happen. I'm just saying that I don't think Congress is in the place where they're actually going to do anything like that.
This shouldn't be a surprise. After all, Congress only recently passed the 2026 National Defense Authorization Act, which was regarded as a pro-NATO, pro-Europe rebuke to the administration. And nothing would blow up NATO and permanently split the US from Europe quite like a military assault on Greenland. As Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen told reporters last Monday, if the United States decides to attack another NATO country, then everything would stop. That includes NATO and therefore post-World War II security.
It's a complete reshuffling of the world order. And, for many people that side with Trump on this issue, they would argue, well, good, that's what we want. We want a complete reshuffling of the world order.
End quote. This feels even more plausible when you remember that the US would likely have to kill Europeans to take the territory. While Denmark has so far refused offers from France to send soldiers to Greenland as part of a tripwire intended to deter an invasion, there are still Danish troops on the territory. Denmark, remember, was a part of the coalition that sent its sons to die in Afghanistan, serving American interests. As the Atlantic Council writes, in Afghanistan, Denmark fought alongside the United States in the tougher mission areas and suffered the most casualties in relation to its population of all NATO allies, apart from the United States. Now again, we urge you to think about this as if it were a real thing that's really happening. Would the US military and American lawmakers really be chill knowing that troops from a steadfast US ally had been killed by US forces, not with the aim of protecting America or upholding democracy, but with the aim of imperial conquest?
And it's important to note here, number one, this is all hypothetical, because while this is definitely an implied threat in all of this, it's still just a speculation that this would happen. But it's a question we do need to ask, because when you say that military action is on the table, when you say we will have Greenland one way or another, then we have to consider that this is a possible outcome. It's only prudent to do that. And it is different. It is different even than something like Iraq, where you could be, like I said earlier, you could argue, and the Congress did stand behind the authorization of military force, saying, yes, if this is indeed a threat, then we should act. You can argue that Maduro was a threat that needed to be dealt with. I know the argument here is national security, but I just don't see that argument when Greenland's part of a NATO ally, which means it's already secured by American force because of our treaty obligation.
You mentioned protecting America because that is currently one of the administration's biggest rationales for acquiring Greenland, that Denmark has so neglected the territory's defense over the decades that it's now easy prey for China or Russia and will only become even more so as the Arctic warms and new shipping lanes open up, so annexing it is therefore the only way to protect the US homeland.
And here's the thing that's happening, is that our actions with this are pushing people like Canada away, and we're actually pushing Canada toward closer ties with countries like China, because they don't have the close relations with us that they used to, and now they're looking for other partners.
As Trump himself told reporters last Sunday, we need Greenland from the standpoint of national security. Now, it's true that military investment in Greenland has been inadequate, but that's not purely down to Copenhagen. As the chairman of Denmark's Defense Committee, Rasmus Jarlov, recently wrote on X, quote, "The USA already has a defense agreement with Denmark that gives them exclusive and full military access to Greenland, but they're not using it. They have downgraded their presence by 99%. Now, apparently, they are telling their base that they need to invade and annex Greenland because they need to have a large military presence."
Right. If the argument is they're not protecting it, so we need to take it to protect it, but you're already able to put troops there to protect it, then the argument is really not the argument, is it? This is really about natural resources. This is about those kinds of things, not about defense.
End quote. Since striking a 1951 treaty, Washington has had almost carte blanche to build bases, house troops, and launch aircraft from or operate ships around Greenland. During the Cold War, over 10,000 troops were stationed there across 17 bases. Those numbers have now dropped to 200 troops in one single base, is not due to Copenhagen or Nuuk. Now, the treaty doesn't give quite the same advantages as the US actually owning the territory, and it would be foolish to say otherwise, but it's a close-run thing, with the treaty updated to include Nuuk after Greenland gained high levels of autonomy from Denmark, requiring little more than the US asking politely before installing some new base. As Danish defense analyst Peter Ernstved Rasmussen told the New York Times, quoting, "It is a courtesy formula. If the US wanted to act without asking, it could simply inform Denmark that it is building a base, an airfield, or a port." End quote. It's a similar situation where access to Greenland's critical minerals are concerned.
There it is.
The Wall Street Journal notes that, quote, "American companies already have mining and other economic rights of Greenland," with Nuuk indicating that it's open to expanding those rights even further.
See, I think this is probably really the heart of the matter, and the argument, I think, from the U.S. administration is that if we don't have exclusive rights to those minerals, then China or Russia or somebody else will get it, and we don't want them, for geopolitical reasons, to have it.
This is one of the major reasons why Europe is so uneasy about Trump's annexation comments. The US can already act pretty much how it wants in Greenland. And the Financial Times reports that Copenhagen is happy to sweeten the deal even further, perhaps even declaring American bases on the island to be sovereign US territory. Yet such deals have so far been rejected or ignored, all while Trump belittles new Danish defense spending on the territory to the tune of billions of dollars. The fear in Europe is that this means the White House won't be satisfied with anything but annexation. But that logic also flows the other way. Europeans are not the only ones who are aware that the US has nothing to materially gain by invading and occupying the island. American members of Congress, military officers, and hopefully members of the public can see it too. And to our mind, that makes military action less likely, not more. So to return to the main theme of this video, it's one thing to depose the hated dictator of a nation deeply opposed to America, one where Chinese and Russian influence is real and tangible. It is another to violently overthrow the democratically elected government of a territory overseen by a treaty ally, all while gaining no material advantage in return. Now, we want to be clear that we are not saying that the US will never acquire Greenland. Times change. The voting population of Greenland is small, and voluntary union with the US might be something Greenlanders decide that they want at some point down the line. Nor are we trying to paint Greenland's relationship with Denmark as all warm and cozy and equal. There are bitter memories of direct rule from Copenhagen, and polling consistently shows that a vast majority of Greenlanders want eventual independence from the kingdom. But we are saying that all the factors we've highlighted so far make an American use of force to annex Greenland both unlikely and counterproductive, possibly even to the extent of causing a permanent rupture within Trump's coalition.
A permanent rupture within Trump's coalition, but also quite possibly a permanent rupture between the United States and the nations that we are closest to in our NATO alliance.
Instead, the likeliest outcome seems to be an ongoing influence campaign to try and nudge Greenlanders into embracing America of their own accord. One that may be coupled with a campaign of pressure or coercion against Denmark.
Yeah.
Yet even here, the outcome is far from certain. On social media sites like X, it's common to see hot takes flying around about how America could just offer every Greenlander, say, $5 million each to join the US and then smugly sit back as they all come running to Uncle Sam. But polling consistently shows that while there are high-profile Greenlanders who like the sound of such a deal, the majority do not want to become Americans. Per The Economist, though most Greenlanders favor independence and the abuses by Denmark's past colonial administrations are still a neuralgic issue, they do not want to become Americans either.
Right, and that's something we have to keep in mind in all of this. And this is, kind of the overarching issue for me personally as an American, is that I want to believe that my government is still the country that stands up for the countries that can't defend themselves, that drops paratroopers into the Netherlands to help liberate them from Nazi Germany, that sends troops to defend France against a German invasion in World War I, those kinds of things. I don't want to see my country as the one that uses its force to bully other nations into either selling territory, giving it up, or that we take it by force because we want it and we think that we can use it better than some other great power can. That's just not who I believe we should be as Americans.
Minds can change, of course, but Prime Minister Nielsen has noted many times that the rhetoric of buying the island or buying off the islanders is disrespectful, smacking of the same colonialism that has turned so many Greenlanders against Denmark. Hard as it may be for some at the top of the US administration to believe, but money really isn't everything. This video is being made prior to Marco Rubio's meeting with Danish and Greenlandic leaders. It's possible that there will be some breakthrough. Maybe the administration will take a face-saving off-ramp that allows Trump to claim a win.
Yeah, I think based on the letter that I read to you earlier, I think we've actually gone a little further the other direction.
Everyone will be distracted by the collapse of the Iranian regime, and Greenland will once again fade into the background. Maybe the US will even make a spectacular offer to Greenland's people that moves the dial on wanting to join America. Or maybe the issue will keep on heating up, turning into the greatest crisis in the history of NATO. Heck, maybe we'll even be proved wildly wrong, and the sight of US helicopters flying over Nuuk as gunfire sounds and explosions light up the sky will soon be beamed all over the world. For now, though, with the information that we do have, we will caution people against panicking too much. Never underestimate the power of narrative, of the ability for the ordinary Joe in the street to tell themselves that they are the good guys. When toppling a despot like Maduro or bombing a mad theocratic regime like Iran, that is easy. But after invading and occupying a peaceful island, capturing or killing its leaders, and likely killing European soldiers trying to defend that democracy, well, the American public might feel like they're in that old Mitchell and Webb Nazi sketch that became a meme, asking themselves, are we the baddies? Frankly, we think they're not. For all the might is right rhetoric from Stephen Miller or the gung-ho ravings of armchair warriors on X, our gut instinct is that there is still a large majority in the USA who would balk at their government doing something so flagrantly cruel and evil.
I would like to believe that as well, but I'm increasingly finding out from social media, which is, as I've noted, is where the loudest extreme voices are. So interacting with people on X, for example, does not mean that that's how a lot of people think. There are, over 300 million Americans, and if there's even 100,000 that think that way, that's a pretty insignificant number, but it's still disturbing. But there are definitely people who do support sending troops to take Greenland by force if necessary. I guess we'll see.
Maybe we're being naive. Maybe the lesson of 2026 so far is that the law of the jungle is all that matters, and ordinary Americans in the Midwest diners are just itching to do to Jens Friedrich Nielsen what Trump did to Maduro.
Yeah.
But we hope that that's an incorrect read of the mood music.
I hope so too. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Let's keep it civil. Let's stand strong for what you believe in. Make passionate arguments, but don't let it become personal. Don't attack other people because they disagree with you. Let's talk about the facts. Let's talk about history, and let's debate what we see from history and how it applies to the situation. Thanks for watching.